The warning light screamed red, oil pressure dropping, rotor temperature spiking. Captain Kyle Sterling pulled back on the collective, trying to coax another 30 seconds out of the dying engine. But the Blackhawk wasn't listening anymore. Below him, downtown Atlanta spread out like a circuit board. Buildings, highways, thousands of people who had no idea a 40,000-pound helicopter was about to fall on them. His co-pilot was unconscious from smoke inhalation. His crew chief was fighting a fire in the cargo bay with a handheld extinguisher that wouldn't last another minute. And the only voice on the radio that made any sense was the one that wasn't supposed to be there. Captain Ethan Caldwell, grounded 3 days ago, not cleared to fly, not authorized to transmit on military frequencies, but somehow, impossibly, talking Sterling through the one maneuver that might keep them all alive. 3 days earlier, Fort Benning's flight operations had been routine. Tuesday morning, 9:15 a.m., Captain Ethan Caldwell was running his third training flight of the week, a standard formation exercise with 2 UH-60 Blackhawks over the Georgia countryside. Clear skies, light wind, perfect conditions. Caldwell had 14 years of Army aviation behind him, over 3,000 flight hours, deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, and a reputation for being one of the smoothest pilots in the battalion. He flew like breathing came naturally, instinctive adjustments, minimal corrections, the kind of pilot who made difficult maneuvers look easy. The exercise was simple. Lead a junior pilot through basic formation flying, maintain spacing, practice communication protocols. Caldwell's student that morning was Warrant Officer Nash Pemberton, 26 years old, fresh out of flight school, eager but inexperienced. They were flying at 1,200 feet, heading south along a designated training corridor when civilian traffic appeared on Caldwell's instruments. A small Cessna, off course, climbing directly onto their flight path. Caldwell's training kicked in instantly. He keyed his radio, warned Pemberton, and executed an urgent descent, dropping his Blackhawk 200 feet in under 10 seconds. The maneuver was aggressive, immediate, and completely necessary. The Cessna passed overhead with less than 50 feet of separation. Pemberton followed Caldwell's lead, descending smoothly, maintaining formation. Both helicopters leveled out, resumed course. No collision, no injury, no damage. Standard emergency procedure executed flawlessly. Caldwell radioed tower, reported the incident, continued the training flight. He thought nothing more of it. In 14 years, he'd made dozens of similar calls. Avoiding civilian aircraft was part of military aviation. You adapted, you reacted, you kept flying. But this time was different. This time, someone was watching. Colonel Wade Brennan, the battalion commander, had been monitoring the flight from the operations center, and Brennan didn't like what he saw. At 2:30 p.m. that same day, Caldwell was summoned to Brennan's office. The colonel was in his mid-50s, career officer, by-the-book mentality. When Caldwell walked in, Brennan was reviewing the flight recorder data. He didn't look up, just kept staring at the screen, replaying the descent. Finally, Brennan spoke. The maneuver was reckless, too aggressive, exceeded safe descent parameters. Caldwell tried to explain. Civilian aircraft in the flight path, collision imminent, standard evasive procedure. Brennan cut him off. Regulations exist for a reason. Caldwell violated them. Flight status suspended pending review. Minimum 3 days. Report to administrative duties. Dismissed. Caldwell stood there processing what he was hearing. He'd avoided a mid-air collision, saved 2 aircraft and 6 lives, and he was being reprimanded for it. He tried once more carefully to walk Brennan through the decision matrix. Time to collision, 4 seconds. Options, climb, descend, or turn. Climb would have put them into the Cessna's climb path. Turn would have taken too long. Descent was the only viable option. The descent rate was aggressive because it had to be. Brennan's response was cold and final. Regulations exist for a reason. Caldwell violated them. Flight status suspended pending review. 72 hours minimum. Report to administrative duties. Dismissed. Caldwell left the office in controlled silence. Didn't argue. Didn't protest. 14 years had taught him that fighting command decisions rarely worked. He handed his flight helmet to the duty officer, signed the necessary paperwork, and walked to the administrative building. For the next 3 days, Captain Ethan Caldwell, one of the most experienced combat pilots in the battalion, would be filing reports, processing supply requisitions, and watching other pilots fly missions he should have been leading. It was humiliating, frustrating, and profoundly unjust, but it was also temporary. 72 hours would pass. The review would clear him. He'd get back in the cockpit. He just had to wait. On the third day, Friday afternoon at 2:17 p.m., everything changed. Caldwell was in the administrative office working through a stack of maintenance reports when the urgent alarm went off. Not the drill alarm. Everyone knew that sound by heart. This was the real alarm, the one that meant someone was in immediate danger. Caldwell's head snapped up. Around him, clerks and administrators froze, unsure what to do. Then the radio mounted on the wall, the one that monitored all active military frequencies, crackled to life. The voice was young, strained, barely controlled. Mayday. Mayday. November 7-3 Delta experiencing engine failure. Fire in the cargo bay. We're going down. Downtown Atlanta airspace. Caldwell was out of his chair before the transmission ended. He moved through the building at a run, heading for the operations center. Behind him, someone was shouting something about staying at his post, but Caldwell didn't hear it, didn't care. A Black Hawk was going down over a populated city, and every second mattered. He hit the operations center doors at full speed, pushed through. Inside, controlled chaos. Lieutenant Iris Fontaine was working the tower frequency, coordinating emergency response. 2 other controllers were pulling up civilian air traffic data, trying to clear airspace. Chief Warrant Officer Glenn Thatcher, the senior maintenance officer, was on the phone with fire services. And on the main speakers, Captain Kyle Sterling's voice kept repeating the same information, increasingly desperate. Caldwell scanned the displays. November 7-3 Delta was a UH-60 Black Hawk, conducting a routine medical transport from Fort Benning to a civilian hospital in downtown Atlanta. On board, Pilot Sterling, co-pilot Pemberton, crew chief Staff Sergeant Omar Landry, and a critically injured soldier being transported for emergency surgery. The helicopter had been 17 miles out when the engine fire started. Now it was at 3,000 feet, losing altitude at 200 feet per minute, and still 12 miles from the nearest military airfield. Downtown Atlanta stretched directly below. Peachtree Street, Interstate 75, the financial district, thousands of people, nowhere to land safely. Fontaine was trying to guide Sterling toward a parking lot, but Sterling's voice came back negative. Fires spreading, hydraulics failing, can't maintain heading that long, need something closer. Caldwell stepped to the console, his mind already working through scenarios. He'd flown over Atlanta hundreds of times, knew every rooftop, every open space, but most of them were too small for a Black Hawk, too surrounded by buildings or blocked by power lines. Sterling needed a clear approach path, solid ground, and room for emergency vehicles. Caldwell's eyes moved across the map display, calculating distances, considering wind direction. Then he saw it. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the football stadium, massive parking structure on the north side, flat roof, reinforced concrete, big enough for a Black Hawk, 1,600 feet long, and only 4 miles from Sterling's current position. Caldwell leaned toward the microphone. Lieutenant Fontaine glanced at him, started to say something about him not being authorized, but stopped when she saw his expression. Caldwell keyed the transmit button. November 7-3 Delta, this is Caldwell. I'm reading your position. You've got one option. Mercedes-Benz Stadium parking structure, north end, bearing 185 from your current position, 4.2 miles. Sterling's response came back immediately, voice tight with stress. Can't see it. Smoke in the cockpit. Navigation's down. Caldwell didn't hesitate. Okay, listen to me. I'm going to talk you in. What's your altitude? 2,800 feet. Descending. Okay, you're going to turn left to heading 185. Count 3 seconds, then level out. Caldwell watched the radar blip move. Sterling was following instructions, but the helicopter's descent rate was increasing. Fire must be affecting the collective control. Caldwell kept his voice calm, steady. Good. Now you're going to see Interstate 75 below you. Wide gray line running north-south. You see it? Affirmative. Follow it south. The stadium's going to be on your left, 4 blocks east of the interstate. Big circular structure. Can't miss it. Roger. Following the interstate. But Sterling's voice was getting rougher, smoke thicker. Behind him, Caldwell could hear muffled coughing, the sound of Landry still fighting the fire. Caldwell pulled up thermal satellite imaging, trying to get real-time data on the fire's spread. It wasn't good. The blaze was in the cargo bay near the fuel tanks. If it reached the tanks before Sterling could land, the Black Hawk would explode mid-air. Caldwell glanced at the radar. Sterling was 3 miles out, altitude dropping through 2,000 feet. At current descent rate, he'd reach the stadium with maybe 60 seconds to spare. Maybe. Caldwell kept transmitting. Kyle, you're doing great. 2 miles out. You should see the stadium now, south side of the interstate. Sterling's response was delayed. Can't see clearly. Smoke. Too thick. Caldwell felt his chest tighten. If Sterling couldn't see, he couldn't land. And without navigation instruments, he was flying blind. Caldwell made a decision. All right, forget visual. I'm going to give you a countdown. On my mark, you're going to begin your final approach. Flare at 50 feet, full collective at 20. Trust your instruments for altitude. Can you do that? Sterling's voice came back, quieter now. Yeah, I can do that. Caldwell watched the radar, calculating timing. Sterling was 1 mile out, descending through 1,500 feet. The stadium was directly ahead. Caldwell keyed the mic. Okay, in 3, 2, 1, begin your approach. Drop your nose 5 degrees. Sterling complied. The Black Hawk's descent steepened, dropping faster now. Caldwell watched the altitude indicator tick down. 1,200 feet, 1,800. He could see the stadium on the video feed now, emergency vehicles converging on the parking structure. 600 feet. Sterling was coming in fast, maybe too fast. 400. Caldwell's voice stayed level. Okay, Kyle, start your flare. Pull back on the cyclic, now. The Black Hawk's nose lifted, slowing the descent. But the helicopter was still dropping too quickly. 300 feet. Sterling's voice strained. Collectives not responding, hydraulics failing. The fire had reached the control systems. Caldwell's mind raced. Without hydraulics, Sterling couldn't control his descent rate. He was going to hit hard, very hard. Caldwell made another decision. Kyle, listen carefully. You're going to touch down fast. Brace for impact. Tell Landry to secure everything and get Pemberton conscious if you can. You're going to need him. Copy. Sterling's voice was barely audible now. 200 feet. The Black Hawk was directly over the stadium, dropping toward the parking structure roof. Emergency crews scattered as the massive helicopter descended, rotor wash blasting debris in all directions. 100 feet. Sterling tried to level out, but the Black Hawk's tail rotor was losing power, causing the aircraft to spin slowly. Caldwell could see it happening on the video feed. If Sterling landed while spinning, the Black Hawk would roll, the rotors would shear off, the whole aircraft would disintegrate. 50 feet. Caldwell's voice cut through the noise. Kyle, hard right pedal, stop the spin. Sterling's response was immediate. The Black Hawk's tail jerked right, counteracting the spin. The helicopter leveled out, still dropping. 20 feet, 10. The Black Hawk slammed into the parking structure roof with a bone-jarring impact. The landing gear collapsed immediately, the fuselage hitting concrete. But the main rotors held. Sterling cut the engines and the rotors wound down. For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the side door burst open and Landry stumbled out, dragging a fire extinguisher, spraying foam into the cargo bay. Behind him, Sterling emerged, helping the unconscious Pemberton. Emergency crews rushed forward with stretchers and additional fire suppression. Within 90 seconds, the fire was contained. Within minutes, all personnel were off the aircraft. No fatalities, no civilian casualties. The burning Blackhawk sat smoking on the parking structure roof, but everyone aboard was alive. In the operations center at Fort Benning, Caldwell slowly released the transmit button. His hands were shaking. Around him, the room had gone completely silent. Lieutenant Fontaine was staring at him. Chief Thatcher had put down his phone. The other controllers had stopped working, all eyes on Caldwell. Finally, Fontaine spoke, her voice quiet. "That was incredible. You just saved their lives." Caldwell didn't respond. He was still staring at the video feed, watching emergency personnel load Sterling onto a stretcher. The pilot was alive. That was all that mattered. Then Colonel Brennan's voice cut through the room. "Captain Caldwell, my office. Now." The tone was cold, clipped. Caldwell turned slowly. Brennan was standing in the doorway, face unreadable. Caldwell followed him out, through the corridor, into the same office where he'd been grounded 72 hours earlier. Brennan closed the door, moved behind his desk, but didn't sit. For a long moment, he just looked at Caldwell. Then he spoke. "You were not authorized to use military frequencies. You are currently grounded. You violated direct orders by interfering with flight operations. Do you understand that?" Caldwell met his eyes. "Yes, sir, I understand that." Brennan's jaw tightened. "And yet you did it anyway." Caldwell didn't blink. "Yes, sir, I did it anyway, because Captain Sterling was going to die. His co-pilot was going to die. His crew chief was going to die. And that injured soldier was going to die. And I was the only person in that operations center who knew how to talk him down. So yes, sir, I violated orders, and I'd do it again." The room went silent. Brennan stared at him for 10 seconds, 20. Then unexpectedly, the colonel's expression shifted. Something changed in his face. A crack in the rigid facade. He moved to his desk, sat down heavily, and rubbed his eyes. After a moment, Brennan spoke again, his voice different now, quieter. "I watched the entire thing on the operations feed. Every word you said, every instruction. That was textbook emergency procedure. Better than textbook. That was experience, real experience, the kind you don't get from a manual." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "I've spent the last 3 days reviewing your entire flight history, every decision you've made in 14 years, every call. And I realize now that what I interpreted as recklessness was actually the kind of judgment that only comes from thousands of hours in the cockpit. Experience I don't have." Caldwell said nothing. Brennan continued, 72 hours ago, I grounded you because I thought you were reckless. I thought you took unnecessary risks. I thought you didn't respect procedure." He paused. "I was wrong. What you did Tuesday morning, dropping that Black Hawk to avoid the Cessna, that wasn't reckless. That was good flying. And what you did today, talking Sterling through that landing, that was extraordinary flying, even if you weren't actually in the aircraft." Brennan opened a drawer, pulled out a file. Caldwell recognized it. His suspension paperwork. The colonel picked up a pen, wrote something across the top page, then pushed the file across the desk. "Your flight status is reinstated immediately. Effective now. The suspension is being removed from your record, and I'm recommending you for a commendation for your actions today." Caldwell looked down at the file, then back up at Brennan. "Sir, I don't need a commendation. I just need to fly." Brennan almost smiled. "You'll get both." "Dismissed, Captain." And Caldwell, "Thank you for not letting protocol get in the way of doing what was right." Caldwell left the office, walked back through the operations center. Fontaine looked up as he passed, gave him a small nod. Thatcher called out from across the room. "Good work, Captain." Caldwell acknowledged them both, but kept moving. He walked outside into the late afternoon sun and headed toward the flight line. His helicopter, his Black Hawk, was sitting on the tarmac where he'd left it 3 days ago. He approached it slowly, running his hand along the fuselage, checking the rotor blades out of habit. Everything looked good, ready to fly. He climbed into the cockpit, settled into the pilot's seat, hands on the controls, didn't start the engine, just sat there, feeling the weight of the helmet, the familiar layout of the instruments. This was where he belonged, not behind a desk, not filing reports. Here, in the cockpit, flying, saving lives, making the calls that textbooks couldn't teach. He thought about Sterling, about the decision to violate orders and talk him down. Would he do it again? Absolutely, without hesitation, because that's what pilots did. They flew, they adapted, they made impossible decisions in impossible situations. And sometimes they broke the rules to do what was right. 3 days later, Monday morning at 8 a.m., Caldwell was back on the flight schedule. His first mission was a training flight, formation flying with junior pilots. As he walked toward his helicopter, he saw someone waiting by the aircraft, Captain Kyle Sterling. His face was bandaged, one arm in a sling, but he was standing, walking, alive. Sterling approached, extended his good hand. Caldwell took it. They stood there for a moment, no words necessary. Finally, Sterling spoke. "You saved my life, and Pemberton's, and Landry's. I don't know how to thank you for that." Caldwell shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You kept that bird in the air long enough to reach the stadium. That took skill, real skill. Most pilots would have panicked, crashed 5 miles out. You stayed calm, followed instructions, trusted your training. That's what saved you." Sterling smiled slightly. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have known where to go without you." Caldwell released his hand. "Well, now we're even. Next time you talk someone down." Sterling's smile widened. "Deal." He turned to leave, then paused. "Hey, Caldwell, I heard what Brennan said about the commendation. You deserve it." Caldwell shrugged. "Just doing the job." Sterling nodded, walked away. Caldwell climbed into his Black Hawk, started the pre-flight checklist. Engine systems, hydraulics, fuel, instruments, everything nominal. He keyed his radio, called tower for clearance. "This is November 8-2. Charlie, requesting clearance for departure. Training flight 2 aircraft, local area." Tower came back immediately. "November 8-2. Charlie, you are cleared for departure. Winds light and variable. Have a good flight, Captain." Caldwell smiled. "Roger, Tower. November 8-2. Charlie departing." He pulled up on the collective, felt the Black Hawk lift smoothly off the tarmac. The helicopter responded perfectly. Every input precise, every adjustment clean. This was what flying felt like when you did it right. When you trusted yourself, trusted your training, and made the calls that mattered. As he climbed to altitude, his student pilot, a young warrant officer named Diaz, pulled into formation beside him. Caldwell checked his instruments, confirmed spacing, then keyed the radio. "All right, Diaz, today we're practicing emergency procedures. You're going to learn what to do when things go wrong, because in aviation, things always go wrong eventually. The question is whether you're ready for it." Diaz's voice came back eager. "Yes, sir, I'm ready." Caldwell smiled. "Good, let's begin." He banked left, heading toward the training area, the Georgia countryside spreading below him. The sky was clear, the weather perfect. Just another day of flying, just another day of teaching the next generation what it meant to be a pilot. But as Caldwell leveled out at 3,000 feet, he found himself thinking about Sterling's landing, about those final seconds when everything could have gone catastrophically wrong. He thought about the decision to break protocol, to violate orders, to trust his experience over regulations. And he realized something important. Being a good pilot wasn't about following every rule in the manual. It was about knowing which rules mattered and which ones didn't. It was about making the impossible choice when no one else could. It was about staying calm when everyone else was panicking. And sometimes Just sometimes. It was about being grounded for doing the right thing, then doing it again anyway. 2 weeks later, Caldwell stood in the battalion headquarters auditorium in full dress uniform as Colonel Brennan pinned a commendation medal to his chest. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and exceptional airmanship in directing the emergency landing of a disabled aircraft under extreme conditions, preventing loss of life and demonstrating the highest standards of Army aviation." Caldwell stood at attention, accepting the medal, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about the next flight, the next emergency, the next time someone would need a voice on the radio talking them through the impossible. Because that's what pilots did. They flew, they saved lives. And when the system tried to stop them, when regulations and protocols got in the way, they found a way to do it anyway. After the ceremony, Caldwell walked back to the flight line. His Black Hawk was waiting, fueled and ready. He climbed in, strapped himself in, started the engines. Tower cleared him immediately. He lifted off, climbed to altitude, and headed west toward the training area. Below him, Fort Benning spread out in organized military precision, barracks, runways, training grounds. Beyond that, Georgia countryside. Beyond that, Atlanta. Somewhere down there, a parking structure roof still bore the scorch marks from Sterling's emergency landing. A reminder that sometimes the only thing between life and death was a voice on the radio and a pilot who knew what to do. Caldwell leveled out at cruising altitude, set his heading, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He was flying again. That's all that mattered. The grounding, the suspension, the argument with Brennan, all of it was in the past. What remained was the job, the mission, the responsibility to be ready when someone needed you most, and Caldwell would be ready, because 14 years of experience had taught him one fundamental truth. Regulations could ground a pilot, but they couldn't stop him from doing what was right. And when the moment came, when someone's life hung in the balance, Caldwell would be there, on the radio, in the cockpit, or wherever he needed to be, because that's what it meant to fly. Not just to operate an aircraft, but to carry the weight of every decision, every consequence, every life depending on you. And Caldwell had proven beyond any doubt that he could carry that weight, even when the system told him he couldn't.